Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from Haggai's second chapter. Now, Haggai, along with Zechariah and Malachi, are the three post-exilic prophets, and as far as we know, the only prophets of that period. Now, throughout the monarchical period and even the exilic period, there was a consistent flow of prophets to guide and direct the people and issue predictions about the future and enforce the covenant. Yet, according the prophecy essentially ceased in Israel from Malachi until the angelic visitation of Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, who Malachi's, the 5th verse of his closing chapter alludes to. And Luke 1:17, I believe, confirms or references Malachi's prophecy. But the historical context in which he was placed was post-exilic, early post-exilic, around with Zechariah he was contemporaries with. And the post-exilic period begins when Judah's conqueror, Babylon, is in turn conquered by another conqueror, Persia, and Israel's conquerors was their liberator. So Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire, was very much a pioneer amongst empire builders and conquerors, in that he came to liberate some captive nations as empires grew in increasing proportion. And he issued a decree that Judah was to be resettled. They had been concentrated in the central city of Babylon. Their ethnic homogeny was preserved intact, but only the dregs of society were essentially left in Judah, and the temple had been destroyed in 586 BM before Messiah, and the foundation for the new temple, which would slightly outlast the first temple. The first temple was built by Solomon in around the year 1010 BM and was razed to the ground by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BM, whereas the new temple would be, now the foundation of it was laid in 536 BM, and 520 BM was when it's completed, and that's where we find Haggai, and it lasted until 70 AD when the Romans destroyed it. So in the 7th month, on the 21st of the month, the word of Yahweh came by Haggai, the Nabi, the prophet, saying, now the 7th month corresponds to our month of October, and the date places it at the chronological juncture during which the Festival of Shelters was celebrated in Israel, and the purpose of it was to remind them of their liberation from Egypt. And here they find themselves newly liberated, not an independent nation. They still have to answer and pay to, and but they have some political autonomy. But you can read more on the details of that holiday in Leviticus's 23rd chapter. And what does he say? He says, "Speak, please, to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, son of Jehoshaphat, and the high priest, and to the remnant of the people, saying," so his audience is Zerubbabel, who was royal descendant, but he had no throne, but he was descended from the final king Zedekiah, and he's listed as one of the Messiah's descendants, and he assumed the leadership position of the earliest wave of exiles. And Joshua was a high priest, and now throughout the majority of the prophetic proclamations, there's usually a dichotomy, more often than not, between the priest and the prophets. But Joshua was very much a commendable priest, and so there was complete harmony between Ezra, who was another high priest and a prolific writer, and the prophets who prophesied during the post-exilic period, and the remnant of the people. So the remnant is who he's addressing. That's largely the nation at large, but also a righteous minority within that nation, because even when they're scattered, there's always a remnant. "Who is there left among you who saw this house in its former esteem? And how do you see it now? Is it not in your eyes as naught when compared to it?" So 66 years ago, some people would have lived to have seen Solomon's temple in all its splendor, and the aesthetic beauty of the new temple favors uncomparably to them. The temple was where the divine presence was concentrated. the problem with confining him to one location is, one, he's the maker of heaven and earth. No four walls can contain him, and many Jews carried that extreme interpretation to their detriment. But now the temple was of central spiritual significance to the ancient Jews, and as such it would have been a site of adoration and affection, and it was beautifully adorned and magnificent in size and something to behold. But he's appealing to the memory, and because some of the elders may not have been impressed by it, but the most impressive aspect of it was the divine presence which dwelled there, not the physical ornaments. And now be strong, Zerubbabel, declares Yahweh, and be strong, Joshua, son of Jehozadak, and the high priest, and be strong, all you people of the land, declares Yahweh, and work, for I am with you, declares Yahweh of hosts. So that's repeated thrice. He earlier addresses all the three identified targets of his message with the message of encouragement to remain faithful, and now to work is now work can be extremely spiritual. I think St. Augustine said that to work is to pray, and anything that Yahweh directs is inherently spiritual. So we need to observe the largely artificial dichotomy between work and worship. The word that I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt, and my spirit is remaining in your midst. Do not fear. So the fear of Yahweh is the fear which expels all other fears. Now, looking at their surroundings and the externals, they had a lot to be fearful of. They were short on resources. They had little momentum as an autonomous community. And they were in a land which the majority of them were estranged to, but it was their ancestral homeland in the Promised Land. And it had been founded as such after their liberation from Egypt, and the covenant that they entered into Moses was still very much intact, and it was according to the terms of those covenants why they had been exiled, because of their repeated waywardness and disobedience. For thus said Yahweh of hosts, once more in a little while, and I am shaking the heavens and earth, the sea and dry land. So he has a monumental work to behold, and the least they can do is meet him halfway, because we cannot hope to match an omnipotent, all-powerful being in the physical feats he's able to do, but the impression is clear that he's working on their behalf, and the admonition is to do your part. And I shall shake all the nations, and they shall come to the delight of all the nations. And I shall fill this house with esteem, said Yahweh of hosts. So the temple would be restored to the pride and crown jewel of Israel or Judah, and it would be a source of pride as a measure of their civilization, which compared favorably well to the other civilizations. The silver in mine is mine, and the gold is mine, declares Yahweh of hope. That's a claim of ownership. Now, there was an economic hardship because they weren't established as a nation, and as such they wouldn't have had a vital commerce, yet all the gold in the world and all the silver belongs to its creator, so he will supply them with the resources. They just need to resourcefully utilize what resources he provides. Let the esteem of this latter house be greater than the former, said Yahweh of hosts, and in this place I give peace, declares Yahweh of hosts. So he's saying that the latter should be regarded as greater than the former. That means the newer, recent, updated, and as opposed to the Solomonic temple. So they were looking at it with the eyes of sight, but through eyes of faith, they can see that it was to be greater, and it would be physically more impressive when Herod the Great added to it. And it would last longer, a little less than 600 years, whereas the previous one lasted a little under 500 years. On the 24th of the 9th month, in the 2nd year of Darius, the word of Yahweh came unto Haggai the prophet, saying, Darius was Cyrus's successor. There was an interval in which I believe his name was Cambyses, ruled in between them, but he's referenced elsewhere throughout scriptures, and it was under him that the Persian Empire reached the apex of its territorial influence. Now his son and successor Xerxes would launch the failed campaign against the Hellenic civilization, which corresponds what we call ancient Greece, and ever since now, for a period after Xerxes, the Persians would remain the dominant world power, but its territorial momentum, as established by Cyrus, continued by Cambyses, and fulfilled by Darius, would halt and eventually retard, and they would be conquered by the Greeks. But more to the immediate history of this event, he identifies the date and the month. It would have been the month of December. And once more, the word of Yahweh comes to Haggai. And what does the word of Yahweh say? Thus said Yahweh of hosts, now ask the priest concerning the Torah, saying, if one bears sacred meat in the fold of his garment, and with the edge he touches bread or stew, or wine or oil, or any food, is it sacred? And the priest answered and said, no. So the priests were the upholders and guardians of the Torah, which was the Mosaic law. And according to that law, they had strict standards of sacredness and profane. What was profane, what was in the temple, was the most sacred space in all of Judaism. So really no profane thing, ceremoniously or otherwise, could enter into that temple. And the power which sanctifies other profane humans which enter that temple is, of course, Yahweh. And Haggai said, if someone defiled by a dead body touches any of these, is it defiled? And the priest answered and said, it is defiled. So one of the strict rules is that one could not come in contact with a dead body and be ceremonially clean enough to enter the temple. And there were a lot of physical guidelines for cleanliness, such as leprosy. They were to be exiled in their own separate communities, but it was to keep hygienic standards for their health benefits. And there's a reason why in every plague which erupted throughout the Middle Ages and beyond, the Jewish quarters in any city invariably enjoyed a higher survival rate because of these health standards. And they did not arrive at these health standards through scientific inquiry, but through revelation, so it was given to their benefit. And Haggai answered and said, so is this people, and so is this nation before me, declared Yahweh, and so is every work of their hands, and whatever they bring near there is defiled. So Yahweh is not impressed in his progress report card. He issues a stern condemnation of their current state of spiritual degeneracy. They are in a state of being profane and unfit to enter his presence. But now, please consider, from this day onward, before a stone was laid or on a stone in the temple of Yahweh, since those days one came to a heap of 20, and there were 10. One came to the winepress to draw out 50 from the press, and there were 20. I smote you with blight and mildew, and hail in all the labors of your hands, and there was none of you with me, declared Yahweh. So in spite of their labor, they were estranged from the one they were laboring for, and he declares them such, and he's just recapitulating the delayed effort which began in 536 BM. Then external pressures they succumbed to and got distracted from the task at hand, which was very much for a purpose, and he's not too thrilled, and rightly so. Consider now from this day forward, from the 24th day of the 9th month, from the day that the foundation of the temple of Yahweh was laid. Consider this. Now the foundation of the second temple was laid 16 years ago in 536 BM. It bears repeating once more. And so he's been paying attention this entire time, and the people haven't been paying attention to what they're supposed to be paying attention to. They were worried about their own worldly wealth as opposed to having the priority of Yahweh, to whom unrivaled and uncompromised affection and adoration and devotion is rightly due. Is the seed yet in the storehouse, and now the vine, and the fig tree, and the pomegranate, and the olive tree have not yet yielded fruit? From this day on I shall bless you. So in spite of their meriting the curses, he's going to bless them, because that's what, in his grace, he gives us what we don't deserve. And Israel was fell short consistently so, and yet they always found themselves on the receiving end of divine grace, and not necessarily for anything they were in themselves. And a second time the word of Yahweh came to Haggai on the 24th day of the month, saying, we can imagine it's the same month, so we're still in December, speak to Zerubbabel, the governor of Judah, saying, I am shaking the heavens and earth. So that's a promise to the secular governor of Judah, who was very much his contemporary and collaborator. Now, the high priest was Joshua, but the prophet was Haggai and Zechariah. And I shall overturn the throne of kings, and I shall destroy the might of the Gentile kings, and overturn the chariots and their riders, and the horses and their riders shall come down, each by the sword of his brothers. So they have the promise of destruction from their geopolitical enemies, broadly identified as Gentiles. That term roughly translates as non-Jew, and their kingdoms, however prominent they might be at the moment or at any place in time in history, are going to vanish and evaporate in the sands of history. And Yahweh's going to utterly destroy them and overturn their chariots and riders. He did that to Egypt at the Red Sea, and he'll do it again. In that day, declares Yahweh of hosts, I shall take you, Zerubbabel, my servant, son of Shealtiel, declares Yahweh, and shall make you a signet, for I have chosen you, declares Yahweh of hosts. So Zerubbabel has a lot to look forward to, yet high expectations to fulfill, and duties and obligations which accompany that grace. And he is identified as a servant. That is a term of affection from Yahweh, and as the master, he acknowledges his servants and places us according to our abilities and capacities. And even though we disappoint invariably and inevitably, he does not disappoint. And that concludes today's message. Thank you so much. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.